Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Campfire Stories, Volume 6, Story Number 1. My Uncle Bobby spent all his time in the Honey Island swamp, so my father, may he rest in peace, fishing, hunting, and camping, and of course drinking. My father and uncle loved to play jokes with me. One morning, we went to bait traps and go check lines, and off on one of the banks was a Timberwolf. My uncle said that he never saw one in the swamp before, only in the timber areas of it. Very odd. So we went on fishing. Later that night at the camp, just from returning from the fishing, I was in the front of the boat, and as soon as we docked, I jumped out, not even looking, and my father and uncle always made me wrap the rope around my hand in case of alligator attack, or something they would never say. My uncle threw the boat in reverse, and I went into the water. My father grabbed my arm and yanked me back into the boat. My uncle started shooting. I thought it was an alligator fixing to get me. Come to find out that the Timberwolf followed us all the way back to the camp, and when I got out of the boat, he was going to jump or pounce on me. My uncle killed it 4 feet from where I was standing. A Timberwolf is very big and aggressive. A .44 Magnum shots killed it, 5 of them. At this time, I was 14 years old. 4 years later, we were getting ready to run lines, and me and my father got to the swamp really late. The road was muddy, and even with lights on high beams and fog lights on, it was dark. The Honey Island swamp is a very scary and dark place at night. You cannot see 10 feet in front with a truck light on, and my uncle was already there field dressing about 15 catfish and a loggerhead turtle. Once we got there, my uncle called my father over to him, and when I started to walk over, my father told me to get the gear and food out of the truck. My uncle was basically raised in the swamp and knew everything about it. Smells, water changes, everything. If something was wrong, he would know. My uncle and father were on the side fixing to start drinking, but they kept looking around as if something was wrong. I asked, but they ignored me and told me to stop talking. I was there also trying to decide on drinking some moonshine. Right when I was going to drink some, there was a loud crashing sound, running in the woods and thumping on a tree in the woods. My father and uncle reached inside and grabbed the biggest guns they could find and gave me a .45 to shoot. They told me if I see anything move, to shoot, and don't stop until I ran out. My uncle had a .44 Magnum and an AR-15. My father had a 10-gauge shotgun and a .50 caliber pistol. My father and uncle turned on the lights all around the camp, and it seemed like you could see something moving right outside the lights, where the dark started with amber-colored eyes. It looked like something crouched down, and when it stood up, and it was freaking big, you could tell the smell would gag you. Very horrible smell, rotten eggs and sewer. They shot a couple of rounds in the direction of the sound, and a loud high-pitched scream that would make the hair all over your body stand on end. Cold chills run all over your body. It was not human. I will be honest, after I heard that, I just about pooped myself. I never heard that before. They stayed up all night long talking about the thing, and the next morning they searched the area and found the log that was broken off a limb, 10 feet up, in the tree. There was very little blood trail that went deep into the wooded area, where my uncle said that it was not safe to go. That right there scared me, and to this day I will never step foot in the Honey Island swamp again. On my uncle's deathbed, I asked him about it, and he told me to ask my father, and I did. My father was diagnosed with leukemia in '07 and died after 3 months. Prior to his death, he told me a story about a Honey Island swamp monster that was big and hairy, like a Bigfoot, with reddish hair, short on body, but somewhat long on the head and neck. But that was when he smells blood and rotting organs, fish and turtle guts. It will come up to the area and try to scare you off, or possibly attack. It could rip the throat out of a wild swamp boar with one slash of its arm. My father asked me to promise him for me never to go in there, ever. And that is one promise that I will keep until I die. Story number 2. Several years ago, my dad and I went to a place called Gores Landing on the St. John River here in Florida. We used to get together every couple of months and camp out overnight and just hang out together. Well, this night we decided to just take my van and sleep in it instead of setting up a tent and dragging all the gear out there. We were sitting around the fire just talking, and he said that he had not brought his gun. He never goes anywhere without his gun. I had left mine at the house because I figured he had brought his. Then neither one of us brought flashlights, so if something did happen, we could not see anything. We were sitting around the fire just talking when 50 feet or so behind us, we heard something big moving through the bushes and palmettos. We both stopped and looked at each other, regretting not having a flashlight or a gun. I asked if he heard it too. I could tell by the look on his face he had. We both had grown up in the woods and know what a deer, armadillo, raccoon, or possum sounds like. This was not anything like that. The worst part was it was just outside of our vision. Then it stopped. We were trying to see what it was, but we couldn't make anything out of the darkness. We just started to walk toward the area, and then whatever it was took off beside the river and jumped across the boat landing area. A good 10 feet. I heard one foot hit the left side of the water, and then another foot hit the right side, and it took off into the woods. It was so big that you could feel the ground shake when it was running. It was definitely on 2 feet. I'm 6'2" and 230 pounds, and I am not afraid to say I was scared. My dad was pretty shook up, and we decided it was best to get in the van for the night. Later on that night, about 2 a.m., we were laying in our sleeping bags when the most god-awful scream woke us up. I sat up and asked my dad if he heard it. He said, "What do you think?" I was looking out of the windows trying to see what it was, but couldn't see anything. I was trying not to crap myself, but I decided I had to have a look at what it was. So I slowly opened the door to the van and stuck my head out to see if I could see something. Nothing. So I got out to get a better view, and still nothing. So I figured while I was up, I could take a leak. I walked to the edge of the woods and started doing my business when all of a sudden something hairy touched my leg. I about screamed like a little girl when I turned around. There was a big dog that rubbed the back of my leg. I have no idea where he came from. I almost peed all over the front of my shorts, trying to turn around and see what it was, and almost had a heart attack. My dad and I laughed hard about that part. But to this day, I will never know what ran through the woods, and I refuse to go out there without a gun to this day. Story number 3. Back in the 80s, I was something of an adventurer and did a lot of rock climbing and caving in West Virginia. Amazingly, with all the rough camping I did in West Virginia, nothing weird ever happened there. Near one cave we used to visit frequently, there was a property where a cult we loosely called the Lobelia Devil people met. We never met any of them, but I'm kind of glad we didn't. My story takes place far from West Virginia. One of my caving buddies and I went on a 3-week trip out west to do some caving and backpacking during this time. One night in the Tetons near Driggs, Idaho, we were camping above the snow line on July 4th to the 5th. In the middle of the night, we were wakened by a really, really weird crying, sobbing, snuffling sound in the distance. It was so unusual that we were wide awake instantly, listening intently for it to stop or go away. Instead, the sound gradually got closer and closer to our tent. It went on and on without pause and got louder and louder. I mean, here we were at over 9,000 feet in our tent in the dark with this creature coming at us. We weren't armed. Neither of us had been raised with guns and had never owned any. Our food and food prep clothing were in a bag hung from a tree, just like you're supposed to do. This damn thing came right up to the tent, literally within a foot of the fabric, still making that spooky noise. We were truly terrified by this time, figuring the tent fabric would part at any moment and we'd be grabbed and eaten by some hungry carnivore. The sound was very loud. It circled the tent. Then it just left. Just like that. Still making the original sound. It headed upslope into the snow among the scrub pine, and eventually we stopped hearing it altogether. Needless to say, one or the other of us said to the other, "What the, was that?" We asked locals in town about the animals we encountered, but there were no firm suggestions as to what it was. My buddy and I are both trained as scientists and are not superstitious at all. It certainly wasn't anything supernatural. It had to be some sort kind of critter like a skunk or a possum, since it didn't seem to be that high off the ground. It wasn't a bear. But then again, what was it? Next story. I'm 43 years old, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was 29 at the time. It was October, and the trees were already in full fall colors. My parents and I were in a cabin fever mood, and the fact that I hadn't spent very much time with them in the past 5 years or so, we decided to pack up the RV and go to Truman Lake for some bow hunting. Mom was excited because we were doing something together for a change, and it felt good to be home again. We left on a Friday and drove the 3 hours to the lake and arrived a little after noon. Now the Army Corps leaves the campsite amenities turned on for the fall deer hunting season, so we didn't have to rough it. The area we went to was pretty far into the woods, and we were surprised that we were the only campers in the whole park. Well, we unloaded the boat and began setting up camp. Now, this lake back then was relatively new, only 10 or so years old, so there was a lot of deadfall along the shoreline, and you really had to watch out for stumps under the water, or you would throw a prop. Not a good thing. Anyway, we were looking for deer signs along the bank so we could set up a good blind to hunt from. About half an hour, we found a good spot in the back of a deep cove about 20 minutes from camp by boat. So we set up 2 blinds, one on each side of the woods, towards the cove at the end so it would be covered by both directions. Then we went back to camp for dinner and some sleep. Well, the alarm went off and we were up and getting ready for what we thought was going to be a very fruitful day. Well, the first thing that we noticed is that there was now sounds coming from nature, as in none. Not even the wind was stirring. Very odd, we thought. But we shrugged it off and started the boat and headed for the blinds. Well, we arrived just as the sky was starting to lighten up, and we tied the boat about 100 yards from the blinds and proceeded on foot. All the while, still no sounds at all, except for the sound of us passing. Then it hit us both at the same time, a feeling of dread. Dad looked at me and I at him, and we just both shrugged it off as the jitters of a new hunting place that we didn't know, and left it at that. When I found the blind that I had set up, or what was left of it, I became keenly aware that we were not alone in these woods. There were tracks all over. The place, what kind I can't say because it was in loose gravel, being on the shoreline, but I knew that they had not been there yesterday. At my father's blind, it was the same thing, all strewn around like a warning to leave now and not come back. Dad was really wild, as was I, and we decided to head out. And now, as we got closer to the boat, we noticed that something was wrong. It was setting deeper than usual, and we got to it. We found that someone or something had punched a hole in the bottom with a big rock that was still lodged in the hole. Now, this boat was a Bass Tracker aluminum hull and pretty well built. Dad crawled into the boat and turned on the bilge pump, and it seemed to help. All the while, we felt eyes watching us, although we didn't see anything. Dad pumped enough water to get the boat and to get it further on shore so we could patch the hole with a life jacket and duct tape. Thank God for duct tape. We cast off and went back to camp and packed up really fast. Mom was wondering why the rush, and we didn't dare tell her what we found. She would really have freaked out. and chalked it up to Dad's driving and the hole in the boat. But we knew the truth and have never been back there since. Next story. My stepmother had a house in Connecticut a couple of years ago. She and my dad said it was haunted and that ghosts would mess with people. One story went that my cousin was really sick and almost had to go to the emergency room and stayed the night because it was close to the hospital. Well, in the middle of the night, an older lady came and talked to both my cousin and his father, saying how she protected the house and made sure all the children were safe and the house was safe. My uncle passed it off the next morning and thought it was just a dream, but his son was 100% better. At breakfast, my cousin turned to my uncle and said, "Daddy, who was that lady we were talking to last night?" They have yet to say it in the house again. When the house was being remodeled, a worker had the great task of pulling down the old ceilings and walls, all plaster of course, to put up new drywall. Every night he would leave his tools in the main hallway so that he could get to work the next morning. Every day he had to search the house for the tools as the ghost moved them. He never spent the night in the house and said he would never do so. Now, I spent the night there 2 nights. Both were very interesting. I was there with my girlfriend, who's my wife now, a sister, brother, dad, and stepmother, visiting the state, among other things. About 12 a.m., we heard this god-awful noise coming from the attic, which used to be slave quarters, and it wouldn't stop. Then all the doors upstairs started to slam and reopen. We all slept in the same room, and everyone was accounted for. Later in the night, several other doors started opening and closing. You just got this fear inside of you. If you've ever experienced like this, you know that fear. The next night, we were about to leave, and we were doing some laundry around 11 or so. Everyone was asleep in the main room. The laundry room backed up to the staircase to what used to be the slave quarters. Something started to walk down the stairs and got to the main landing in heavy colonial-style boots. I about pooped myself and ran out of the room. Upon further discovery, the house was built in the 1600s. It was one of several houses that had major Civil War generals stay, and even the president at the time. Several people died at the house, including one soldier, an old caretaker, 3 to 4 children, and many slaves, each of which still continued to haunt the house. It was the creepiest thing I've ever dealt with. To this day, I can still remember the hair standing up on my neck. Next story. The first story I have here happened in the early spring. It was in the mountains. The Forest Service had just opened the fire road to vehicle traffic. There were still spots of snow and mud on the roads. I was going to go target shooting, alone. I drove back on the road for several miles. Very few people had been back this far yet in the season. My tracks were the first in the snow and mud that I could see. I found a small clearing just off the main road, and as I was setting up some targets, I kept having a strange feeling of something watching me. I had the need to turn around quickly every few minutes to check my 6. Every time I turned, I saw nothing strange, yet I still had a very strong, weird feeling. I started to get even more creeped out, because I knew I was the first vehicle on the road for a good while. Yet, I felt something or someone was near and watching. I tried to man up and shake the weird feelings. I walked the perimeter of the clearing with gun in hand, trying to put my fear at ease, but found nothing odd. I started to try and focus on my shooting, but could not shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. I soon gave up target shooting and packed up the target stands. Before leaving, I decided to hike up the road a bit to a lookout spot and get a good look around. I was about 800 yards up the road when my inside started screaming for me to get the hell out of there, now. As I started down the road back to the truck, I saw tracks in the mud that made my blood run cold. It was a huge paw print, and it was on top of one of my boot tracks. I was scared for several reasons. One was the print was huge and very, very fresh, like minutes old. Second, the cat was not afraid of all the shooting, so it was not very afraid of me. Then the thought hit me. I was being hunted. I was terrified. I spun around several times and saw nothing. I had a huge urge to run to the truck, but kept thinking that would be stupid. I did not know what to do, so I backed up to a tree, gun in hand, and tried to gather my thoughts about the situation. Finally, after sitting against a tree, listening intently for any sound and hearing nothing, I decided to make my way back to the truck very slowly, moving from tree to tree. When I finally made it back to the truck, I was surprised to see more fresh tracks in the mud near the truck. Quickly, I got in and left. I never saw the animal, but I think it was a very hungry mountain lion. We had reports of several sightings in the local mountains later in that year. I try and listen to my little voice. This time I should have left way earlier, but I was trying to be cool and not act like a wimp. The next time I hear my little voice, I acted, and things turned out differently. The setting for this is very important. To start to understand the fear, the true danger, and the vulnerability of the situation I was in. I was on my motorcycle trying to take a shortcut through the desert at night. I was riding my Honda ST1300. This is a sport touring street bike. Think small Goldwing, that when loaded is easy 750 pounds or more. The shortcut was a road on a map and the GPS. I traveled 30 miles from the last turnoff and town when I started down the shortcut road. I had not seen a car for a long time, and it was very late and completely dark. The first 8 miles on the shortcut were fine, rough pavement, but fine. As I moved along, the road turned to well-maintained dirt and gravel. I kept going thinking that it would get better. I only had another 30 miles to go. After another 10 miles of good dirt, the road started to degrade into a very rough trail and small parts of good road. I was completely focused on dodging the large rocks, deep sand, and keeping the bike upright, so I was not thinking clearly about the situation I was getting into. My speed was no faster than 10 to 12 miles an hour, max. The thought of turning around and retracing all that rough, difficult road, and the constant hope of the road getting better, kept me grinding along. After an hour of the slow-moving trial, I could see in the moonlight a small mountain range, and I knew the road went through them, and on the other side was a main highway. I was excited until I saw the lights of another vehicle moving towards me. It was then I was shocked when I realized the vulnerable situation I was now in. No one knew where I was, no cell service, alone at night, in the desert. At midnight it was still over 100 degrees, and on a bike that could not be driven fast over that terrain. Not good. I've always felt safe on the bike because I could ride away. Not this time. Not on this road. Impossible. For then, the next 30 minutes I watched as we closed in on each other. I saw no reason in running, as I knew they would catch up before I could get back to good road and escape. I could see the truck slowly moving down the mountain road towards me. The whole time my mind raced with thoughts of the movie Deliverance and a truck full of bad guys just waiting to rope and or kill me out there and, in the middle of nowhere. No one would ever know what happened to me. I was scared. I knew I could not outrun the truck. I could not turn off the road, and I was alone in the dark. My mind raced for a solution. I finally made a plan. I pulled to the side of the road and retrieved my Glock and 2 extra mags from the side bags. That made me feel a lot better. I would go down fighting at least. We were now within a half mile of each other. I stopped again on the side of the road and got ready for my final stand. My heart pounding. Part of the plan was I'd put my Camelback full of water on, had several power bars, a good knife, and several flashlights in my jacket pocket. My plan was if they attacked, I would run off into the desert darkness and then survive until I could fight back and win or get help. I was ready as I could be. I left the bike running with the lights on low beam. I moved off the road a few feet and kept the Glock hidden in my pocket. As the truck approached, my fear of the impending battle was intense. 100 yards, the truck did something completely unexpected. It sped up to an insane speed for that road. The truck was bouncing hard and I could hear the tires spinning, motor revving and the truck bottoming out to suspension as it impacted the ground after each bump. I stepped further off the road and watched as the truck raced past me in a cloud of billowing dust and crashing noises. As it passed, I could see 2 males and a girl in the cab staring with terror at me through the window. Another 50 yards, the truck slowed to a more reasonable pace and just kept going, never to be seen again by me. I started to laugh at myself. I had worked myself up thinking They were going to get me, but they seemed way more scared than me. I just sat down and laughed for a while as I watched the red lights slowly disappear across the desert. I was, however, exhausted from all the stress, even though things turned out fine. I was still wore out. After a short rest, I started down the road, only to finally give up on the shortcut and turn around. I'd had enough adventure, just wanted to head home, even if it was longer. On the way home, I thought about the incident and realized I did okay, seeing my vulnerabilities and making a plan if they had turned out to be dangerous. Then it occurred to me, they might have sensed my willingness to fight if pushed, and their little voices were screaming to leave. Nice turn of events this time. Next story. Last year at Knoll Lake in Arizona, me and a buddy went camping in this area. We expected to stay around 3 days. The first day was uneventful and peaceful. On the second day, around mid-afternoon, we got a whiff of something foul, kind of like a garbage can on a hot day. It came and went suddenly. We joked to each other, accusing the other of passing gas. About an hour later, I was at the shoreline of the lake fishing, and I got a whiff of that foul smell again. So I looked around, very annoyed, but I didn't detect anything. My buddy was about 75 yards away at camp as you follow the shoreline. So I grabbed my gear and headed back. In the evening, we were cooking, and we heard what sounded like someone chopping wood about 200 yards up the hill behind us. We just stood up and stared in the general direction. It lasted about 10 minutes with intervals in between. I don't remember what we said to each other, but we sat back down. I only had my machete and a boning knife, no guns. We were talking and drinking when we suddenly heard this deep, throaty bellow. This sound was so loud that it echoed through the hills above us. We about crapped our pants. I know for a fact we don't have any wildlife that can make that kind of noise in Arizona. Me and my buddy decided to drag the tent and stuff right up to the shore, because whatever was out there was not going to be able to sneak up from behind. We mulled, packing up and heading for the truck, but it was on the other side of the lake by the forest road. It took us half an hour to hike to our campsite on day 1. Then, a little while later, we heard the chopping wood sound, but it was further away than the first time that we heard it. At this point, we were on edge. We were trying to rationalize what we were hearing, but it didn't make sense. Then about 10 minutes later, we heard footsteps approaching us from our right along the shoreline. We shined our flashlights in that direction, and we saw a guy and a girl heading towards us. And they shouted, "Hey guys!" They reached our camp, and they looked scared. They immediately asked us if we heard a strange sound and replied, "Yes." So after some conversation, we decided that we should band together and hike back to the forest road where our vehicles were. We got our stuff together and headed out. Right before we got to the road, we heard a massive branch break, and the guy's girlfriend started to run ahead of us, and we followed her. We got out of there around 2 a.m., and we headed to Payson. I've been stalked by a mountain lion before and chased by javelina, but this was the one nerve-wracking experience that I will never forget. Next story. I used to have my own big truck. I delivered a load to New Orleans about noon one day. I had driven all night to get there from Atlanta. I got reloaded for the trip home and found a truck stop in Slidell, Louisiana. I slept for about 8 hours, got a shower and good meal. I was going to run Highway 59 north to Birmingham. I was maybe 30 to 45 minutes out of Slidell. It was 2:30 a.m. I was well rested and ready for the 8-hour run home. I was running fast as there was no traffic, none. No cars, no exits, nothing. I saw someone standing on the side of the road just out of the woods. I started to slow down. My first thought was hitchhiker. I had my bright lights and fog lights on. He was lit up real well. I was still a half mile out. I thought, damn, he is big. Then I thought, he is really hairy. I put the brakes on hard as he took about 2 steps towards the road. I never stopped completely but came to a crawl. He was about 6 or 7 feet tall, all hair, no neck, massive shoulders. The hair on his head blended with the hair on his body. It was either some idiot in a suit or a creature I had never seen before. It would take a complete crap for brains to dress up and stand on the side of the road in that part of the country. Bubba will shoot first and identify later. Everybody has a pickup with long guns in the rear window. All I carried when I drove was Colt Mustang Pocket Light in 380. Had I been stupid enough to stop, I was seriously underarmed. The thing was huge. I was wide awake alert. When I realized what I was looking at, I pushed the throttle so far I was in danger of losing toes in the engine fan. The rest of the drive home, I kept replaying it in my head. I told my wife about a month later. She believed me. And believe me, I do not make things like this up. Next story. I had a bad hiking experience back in 2001. Me and my cousin decided to go hiking around an awesome place. We go trout fishing in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. No trails. We wanted a new experience, so we blazed a trail into a very remote area. My dad dropped us off at the creek on the 9th and was going to pick us up at the same location on the 10th. The day was awesome, good weather, although it was hot since the hiking was all uphill and steep. We had our goals set for the top of the mountain, but due to the thick vegetation we had to whack through most of the way, we didn't make our goal. Come evening, we had made it to a part of the mountain that leveled out, so we decided this was where we would stop for the night. We didn't have tents. Instead, we made shelters from tarps and ropes that we had taken. We made our fire and cooked up some of our freeze-dried food. By the time we got done eating, it was probably around 10 p.m. We were sitting around the fire just relaxing from our grueling hike to this point. The insect noise was deafening that night, but I started to hear this odd noise off in the distance. It raised a hair on my neck. I didn't say anything at first. I was just trying to listen closer, but soon I could tell it was getting closer. I said to my cousin, "Do you hear that?" But he couldn't yet. I said, "It sounds like people talking loud and making noise out there. There is no way there are other people way out here and walking around at this hour." And all the while it was getting even closer, and he could hear it also. And it was now clear that it was a pack of dogs or coyotes and that they were headed our way. We could hear them barking, yapping, snarling, and just making all kinds of noise. At this point, we were both very frightened and were piling more wood on the fire, hoping that this would help keep them away. They got so close that I was thinking any second I'll be able to see them. They must have run by within 20 yards of us, but never came into the light of the fire. And just as quickly as they came, they went off into the distance until we couldn't hear them anymore. That was really scary. We didn't know if they were going to come back. Neither of us slept in our shelters that night. We even contemplated packing up and trying to find our way back down the mountain, but decided that was not a good idea at all. We just sat around the fire and leaned against some trees, dozing off periodically throughout the night. As soon as it was light enough to see, we packed up and hiked back down. And the dogs weren't the only thing. All throughout the night, I could hear things from further up the mountain. It was very strange. The sound of trees crashing down, something large pushing through thick brush. I won't go there again without a weapon.